The mop bucket squeaked as Daniel pushed it down the long metal hallway. It was late at night, and the lights above him buzzed with a soft yellow glow. Most of the aliens who worked at the facility had gone home hours ago. Only a few guards walked around, and they never really looked at him. To them, he was just the human who cleaned up messes. Nobody important. Daniel didn't mind that. He liked the quiet. He liked the way the facility felt different at night, calmer, slower, like it was finally allowed to breathe. During the day, this place was full of noise. Scientists shouted orders. Machines beeped. Soldiers marched in tight lines. But at night, it was just him, his mop, and the low hum of the building's old power core. He worked in a strange place. The facility bred dragons. Not the kind from old human stories, gentle giants who lived in caves and hoarded gold. These dragons were built for war, grown in tanks, trained with fear, and treated like machines instead of living things. Daniel had seen the training rooms once, by accident. He never wanted to see them again. Tonight, his job was simple. Clean the east wing, then move to the storage hallways near the hatchling pen. He had passed by that pen many times before. It was a large glass-walled room with padded floors, where 4 baby dragons were kept. He always glanced in, just for a second, before continuing his work. Tonight, when he reached the hallway near the pen, something felt wrong. The door to the enclosure was open. Not damaged, not broken, just open, like someone had left it unlocked. Daniel stopped pushing his cart and stared at the empty room. The padded floor was bare. No dragons in sight. His stomach twisted. If the guards found out the hatchlings were missing, there would be chaos. Alarms. Search teams. Punishment, probably for him, since he was the only one nearby. He should have reported it right away. That was the smart thing to do. Instead, he found himself walking further down the hallway, checking each open door and quiet corner. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was worry. Maybe it was curiosity. He just knew he had to find them before anyone else did. It didn't take him long. Down near the maintenance closet, where he stored his cleaning supplies, he heard a small sound. A soft chirp, almost like a bird, but deeper. He opened the closet door slowly, and there they were. 4 baby dragons, curled together in a pile of old rags and cleaning cloths. They were small, about the size of large dogs, with thin scales that shimmered faintly in the dim light. One was reddish, one bluish, one gray, and one much smaller than the rest, tucked in the middle of the pile like it was hiding. They all froze when they saw him. Wide eyes stared up at Daniel, filled with something he didn't expect from creatures bred for war. Fear. Not the fear of a predator facing a threat, but the fear of something small facing the unknown. Daniel crouched down slowly, keeping his movements calm. "Hey," he said quietly. "You're not supposed to be out here." None of them moved. The smallest one let out a tiny whimper and pressed closer to the others. He knew he should call security. That was the rule. Any unusual activity involving the hatchlings had to be reported immediately. But looking at them now, shaking, quiet, clearly terrified of something, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Not yet. Instead, he sat down on the floor of the closet, right in front of them. He didn't reach out to touch them. He simply sat there, his back against a shelf of cleaning supplies, and waited. Minutes passed. The dragons watched him carefully, unsure of what he wanted. Slowly, the gray one shifted forward, just a few inches. Its nose twitched as it sniffed the air near him. Daniel stayed still. Another minute passed, and the gray one moved closer, until its head rested lightly against his knee. He almost laughed in surprise, but held it back, not wanting to startle it. One by one, the others followed. The blue one, then the red one, and finally the smallest one crawled its way onto his lap, curling up like a cat despite being far heavier than one. Daniel sat there in stunned silence, surrounded by 4 baby dragons who were supposed to be dangerous weapons, all of them now sleeping soundly against him. Their small chests rose and fell steadily, a sign of comfort he hadn't expected to see in creatures raised inside metal walls and cold cages. He didn't know how long he sat there. Long enough that his legs went numb. Long enough that the hallway outside grew even quieter. He knew he would have to explain this eventually, but for now, he stayed still, letting the small dragons sleep peacefully, something he suspected they hadn't done in a long time. When the first light of morning began creeping through the small window near the ceiling, Daniel finally moved. The hatchlings stirred, blinking awake slowly. They didn't run from him this time. Instead, they looked at him with something new in their eyes. Not fear, but a strange, quiet trust. He gently guided them back toward their enclosure before the day's shift began, making sure no one saw. As he watched them settle back onto their padded floor, the smallest one looked back at him one last time before curling up to rest. Daniel had no idea what had just happened or why it happened, but he knew one thing for certain. This wouldn't be the last time. 3 nights passed before it happened again. Daniel had almost convinced himself that the first time was a strange accident, a mistake in the locking system, nothing more. But on the 4th night, as he pushed his cart past the hatchling pen, he noticed the door was open once more. This time, he wasn't as shocked. He walked straight to the maintenance closet, and sure enough, there they were. 4 small shapes curled together in the dark, waiting for him like they somehow knew he would come. He sat with them again that night, just like before. And the night after that. And the night after that. It became something of a routine, though Daniel still didn't understand how they kept escaping. The enclosure had sensors, cameras, and locks that were supposed to be impossible for creatures their size to open. Yet every few nights, without fail, he would find them waiting for him in the same quiet corner of the facility. He started talking to them during these visits, softly, almost like humming. He didn't know if they understood human words, but it didn't seem to matter. The sound of his voice alone seemed to calm them. Sometimes he sang old songs his grandmother used to sing to him when he was young, simple tunes about rivers and stars, and going home. The hatchlings would listen quietly, their eyes half closed, until they eventually drifted off to sleep against him. Unknown to Daniel, someone else had begun to notice. Sila, the lead scientist in charge of the hatchling program, had been reviewing the nightly security footage after receiving a strange report from one of the automated systems. The report noted unexplained containment breaches occurring at irregular intervals, always at night, always without triggering the main alarm system. She expected to find a technical malfunction. Instead, she found something far stranger. On the screen, she watched as the 4 hatchlings, one by one, squeezed through a narrow gap near the base of the enclosure door, a gap far too small for a full-grown dragon, but apparently just wide enough for hatchlings still learning to control their growing bodies. They moved through the halls with quiet purpose, avoiding patrol routes, slipping past guards without a sound, until they reached the same destination each time. The maintenance closet, where the human janitor waited. Sila watched the footage for hours, rewinding certain moments again and again. She saw the hatchling's body language shift the moment they entered the closet, tense shoulders relaxing, tails curling instead of whipping nervously, ears, small ridges near their skulls, lowering into a calm position. These were signs of comfort, not distress. Signs she had never once seen during official observation sessions. She had studied dragon behavior for years, mostly under strict military-funded research meant to make them more obedient, more controllable, more useful as weapons. In all that time, she had never seen a hatchling voluntarily seek out comfort from anyone, let alone from a member of a different species entirely. Instead of reporting the security breach immediately, as protocol demanded, Sila found herself hesitating. She told herself it was simply scientific curiosity. She wanted to understand why this was happening before jumping to conclusions. That was the excuse she gave herself, at least. Over the following nights, she began quietly monitoring Daniel's movements, careful not to alert him or draw attention from her superiors. She adjusted a few internal reports to delay any red flags about the hatchling pen's supposed malfunctioning door sensors, buying herself more time to observe. She watched as Daniel continued his usual nightly routine. Mop the floors, check the storage rooms, sit quietly with the hatchlings whenever they appeared. He never tried to control them, never gave commands, never used any of the training tools the facility typically relied on. He simply existed near them, calm and steady, letting them decide when to approach. It baffled her. Everything she had been taught about raising dragons involved strict control, careful conditioning, and constant supervision to prevent emotional attachment, which was considered a weakness in a weapon. Yet here was a human with no training, no authority, and no scientific background, achieving something none of the facility's advanced programs had managed in years. Genuine trust. One night, curiosity finally won over caution. Sila made her way down to the lower levels herself, moving quietly through the halls until she reached the maintenance closet. She stood outside the door for a long moment, listening. Inside, she could hear Daniel's voice, low and steady, humming some unfamiliar tune. She peeked through the small gap in the door and saw the 4 hatchlings sleeping peacefully around him, just as the footage had shown. She didn't reveal herself that night. Instead, she quietly stepped back and returned to her office, her mind racing with questions. Questions about the hatchlings' development, questions about the facility's methods, and questions about the strange, quiet janitor who seemed to have found something no scientist ever had. She knew she would have to speak with him eventually. But for now, she decided to keep watching, keep learning, and keep this discovery to herself, at least until she understood exactly what it meant. It was almost 2 weeks before Sila finally approached Daniel directly. She waited until the middle of the night, when the facility was at its quietest, and found him in the east wing, mopping near the supply closets just like always. He noticed her presence before she said anything, glancing up with a look of mild surprise. Scientists rarely came down to this part of the building, especially not at this hour. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, setting his mop against the wall. Sila studied him for a moment before speaking. "I know about the hatchlings," she said plainly. "I have seen the footage. I know they come to you almost every night." Daniel's expression shifted, a mix of worry and resignation. He had been waiting for this conversation, half expecting it to end with him losing his job, or worse. "I didn't teach them to do that," he said carefully. "I just didn't chase them away." "That is exactly what confuses me," Sila replied, her tone more curious than accusing. "Every method we use here is built around control, reward and punishment, strict schedules, isolation when necessary, to prevent unwanted attachment. You have done none of that, and yet they trust you more than they trust anyone in this entire facility." Daniel shrugged, unsure of what she wanted him to say. "I just talk to them, sing sometimes, when they seem upset. I never force them to do anything. I let them come to me if they want to." Sila crossed her arms, thinking. She had spent years studying the emotional development of the hatchlings from a scientific distance, always through the lens of control and conditioning. But watching the footage of Daniel with them had raised questions she couldn't ignore. "Would you allow me to observe more closely?" she asked. "Not to stop what you were doing. I want to understand it." Daniel hesitated, worried this might lead to the hatchlings being taken from him or punished for their nightly escapes. But something about Sila's tone told him she genuinely wanted to help, not report him. "As long as it doesn't hurt them," he said finally. Over the following nights, Sila began quietly observing their interactions up close, staying just far enough to avoid disturbing the hatchlings' comfort. She brought small scanning devices to monitor their vital signs and brain activity, hoping to understand the physical effects of these visits. The results left her stunned. Every time the hatchlings settled around Daniel, their stress hormones dropped rapidly, far lower than any levels recorded during standard, positive reinforcement training sessions. Brain scans showed increased activity in regions associated with bonding and safety, patterns she had only seen briefly in adult dragons who had formed strong pack connections in the wild, something considered nearly impossible to replicate in captivity. She began comparing this data to the results from the facility's official training program, the one led by Commander Redhis and his military team. Those methods focused on obedience through fear and reward, producing hatchlings that followed commands but showed consistently high stress markers, aggressive tendencies, and poor social bonding, even with each other. The difference was staggering. Daniel's presence alone, without any formal training, deliberate commands, or structured routine, produced healthier, calmer, and more emotionally stable hatchlings than months of official conditioning ever had. Sila began spending her evenings compiling this data secretly, unsure of how to present it without drawing unwanted attention. She knew Commander Redhis would not react well to the idea that a simple, untrained janitor had succeeded where his entire program had failed. Redhis believed strongly that dragons needed to be hardened, not comforted, in order to become effective weapons. Despite the risk, Sila couldn't ignore what she was witnessing. Late one night, after another observation session, she stayed behind to speak with Daniel again. He was gathering his supplies, ready to sneak the hatchlings back to their pen before sunrise. "They trust you completely," she said, watching the 4 dragons stretch and yawn around him. "Do you understand what that means?" Dragons in the wild choose their pack based on trust and safety. What you have built with them, without even trying, is exactly that. Daniel looked down at the sleepy hatchlings, the small gray one nudging its head against his hand. I just didn't want them to be scared, he said simply. That's all. Sila smiled faintly, something she rarely did during long research nights. That may be the most important discovery I have made in years, she admitted. Sometimes the simplest answer is the one everyone overlooks. As she walked back toward her office that night, her mind buzzed with new questions and new possibilities. She knew this discovery could change the facility's entire approach to raising dragons. But she also knew it would not be an easy case to make, especially with Commander Red as unlikely to accept an unconventional method built on kindness rather than control. For now, she decided to keep gathering evidence, hoping that when the time came, the data would speak for itself. What she didn't yet realize was how soon that time would come, and how quickly things were about to change. Word travels fast in a facility built on strict schedules and constant surveillance, even when people try to keep secrets. It took less than 3 weeks for Commander Redhis to hear rumors about strange readings coming from the hatchling enclosure, readings that didn't match the expected patterns of his training program. Redhis wasted no time investigating. He pulled the security footage himself, bypassing Sila's attempts to quietly manage the reports. What he saw enraged him. Night after night, footage showed the hatchlings slipping past their containment, wandering the halls unsupervised, and gathering around a low-level maintenance worker like he was some kind of pack leader. He called Sila into his office the next morning, his frustration barely contained. "You knew about this," he said, not bothering to hide the accusation in his voice. "You knew, and you said nothing." Sila stood firm, though she chose her words carefully. "I was gathering data before making a report," she explained. "The results are significant. The hatchlings show far lower stress levels and stronger emotional stability when interacting with the janitor than they do during any of our standard training sessions." Redis scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "Stress levels do not win wars, Doctor. Obedience does. Strength does. These creatures are being raised to serve a purpose, not to nap in some janitor's lap like house pets." "With respect, Commander," Sila pressed, "our current methods are producing unstable results. Aggression toward handlers. Poor bonding between hatchlings. Slower physical development compared to historical records of wild-raised dragons. What I have observed suggests an alternative approach, one based on trust rather than fear, could produce far more reliable results long-term." Red has dismissed her concerns outright. "This facility does not have the luxury of long-term experiments. We have deadlines, Doctor, set by people far above either of us. I will not have military assets compromised because of some emotional attachment to a maintenance worker." He ordered immediate changes. The hatchling enclosure would be fitted with reinforced locks, upgraded sensors, and constant guard supervision to prevent further breaches. Daniel, meanwhile, would be reassigned to a different section of the facility entirely, far from the hatchlings, effective the following night. Sila tried to argue against the decision, but Red has made it clear the matter was no longer open for discussion. That night, Daniel arrived for his shift only to be informed of his new assignment by a stern-looking supervisor. He would now be working in the facility's lower storage levels, nowhere near the hatchling pen. No explanation was given beyond a simple statement that his duties had changed by direct order of Commander Redis. Daniel didn't argue. He had no authority to challenge a military decision, and he understood the risk his nightly visits carried. Still, as he made his way to his new post, a heavy feeling settled in his chest. He couldn't stop thinking about the hatchlings, wondering if they would be all right without him. He got his answer sooner than expected. Without Daniel's usual visits, the hatchlings grew restless almost immediately. They refused their evening meals, pacing anxiously around their newly reinforced enclosure. The small gray one, who had grown particularly attached to Daniel, cried out repeatedly, a sound the facility's staff had never heard from any hatchling before, high-pitched and distressed, echoing through the halls late into the night. Guards attempted to calm them using standard procedures, but nothing worked. The hatchling's agitation only grew worse as the hours passed. By midnight, tension in the enclosure had reached a breaking point. The bluish hatchling, the boldest of the four, began slamming its body against the newly reinforced door, driven by pure panic rather than any real understanding of what it was doing. The door, though stronger than before, was never designed to withstand repeated impacts from a creature growing more powerful by the day. After several attempts, the metal frame buckled and the door burst open. Alarms blared instantly throughout the facility. Guards scrambled into action, weapons ready, expecting an aggressive escape. Commander Redis received the emergency report within seconds and rushed toward the containment area himself, furious that his new security measures had already failed. But this wasn't an act of aggression. It was fear. The bluish hatchling moved quickly through the halls, not attacking anyone, not causing destruction beyond the broken door, simply searching, sniffing the air, following some instinct that led it deeper into the facility. The other three hatchlings, sensing their siblings' distress, soon followed, breaking free through the same damaged doorway. Word of the escape spread through the facility within minutes. Every available guard was called to contain the situation, weapons drawn, tension rising with each passing second. Somewhere deep in the lower levels, Daniel, unaware of the chaos unfolding above him, continued his new assigned duties, completely in the dark about what was happening just a few floors away. The peaceful nights he had spent with the hatchlings were now replaced with a facility on full alert, guards on edge, and 4 frightened young dragons running loose through unfamiliar halls, searching desperately for the only sense of safety they had ever known. The alarms echoed through every level of the facility, sharp and unrelenting. Guards moved in tight formations, sweeping through hallways with weapons raised, following reports of the escaped hatchlings. Commander Redis stood at the central command station, watching the security feeds with a tight jaw, barking orders to every unit within reach. Non-lethal restraints only, he commanded firmly. These are still valuable assets. I want them contained, not destroyed. On the monitors, the bluish hatchling could be seen moving quickly through the upper corridors, its movements frantic but not aggressive. It knocked over equipment carts and startled maintenance workers, but never once attacked anyone directly. It simply pushed forward, driven by instinct, searching for something or someone. Sila arrived at the command center just as a team of guards cornered the hatchling near the central elevator shaft. She watched in growing dread as the young dragon, cornered and terrified, let out a piercing cry and reared back, wings flaring instinctively in a defensive posture. "Wait," she shouted, pushing past a nearby guard. "It's not attacking. It's scared." Her warning came too late to stop the guards from raising their restraint weapons, devices designed to release an electrical shock strong enough to subdue a creature many times the hatchling's size. Sila's stomach twisted as she realized the danger. A shock that powerful could seriously injure, or even kill, a hatchling still this young. "Stand down," she yelled, desperation clear in her voice. "That thing will kill it." The guards hesitated, unsure whether to follow her order or Rethus's earlier command. In that moment of hesitation, a voice rang out from further down the hallway. "Blue, hey, it's all right." Every head turned. Daniel came running around the corner, having heard the commotion from the lower levels, and abandoned his post the moment he realized what was happening. He hadn't stopped to think about the consequences. He only knew the hatchlings were in danger, and he wasn't going to stay away. The bluish hatchling, nicknamed unofficially by Daniel weeks ago, froze at the sound of his voice. Its wings lowered slightly, tension easing from its small frame despite the guards still surrounding it. "Move away from the guards," Daniel said softly, stepping closer despite a guard's warning shout to stay back. "Come here. It's okay." The hatchling hesitated for only a second before rushing toward him, nearly knocking him over as it pressed against his legs, trembling. Daniel knelt down immediately, wrapping his arms around its neck, ignoring the tense standoff still happening around them. Commander Redis arrived moments later, furious to find his orders being ignored and a civilian worker in the middle of a supposed containment crisis. "Get that man out of here," he snapped, not yet noticing how calm the hatchling had suddenly become. Before anyone could act, the other 3 hatchlings arrived, moving quickly through the hallway, drawn by the sound of Daniel's voice. The gray one reached him first, pressing its small head against his side. The red one followed, curling protectively near his other arm. Even the smallest hatchling, the one who rarely left the other's side, pushed its way forward until it was tucked safely against Daniel's chest. The entire hallway fell silent. Guards lowered their weapons slowly, stunned by the sight in front of them. For hatchlings, bred and trained under strict military protocols, previously unpredictable and difficult to control, now sat completely calm, completely safe, surrounding a single unarmed human who had no formal training in handling dragons whatsoever. Redhis stood frozen, his earlier anger replaced by confusion. He had spent months trying to control these creatures through strict discipline and firm authority. Yet here was a simple janitor achieving total calm, with nothing more than a soft voice and open arms. Sila stepped forward slowly, breaking the tense silence. "This is exactly what I have been trying to explain, Commander," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos of moments earlier. "They don't need force. They need trust." Redis said nothing at first, staring at the scene before him. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Every soldier, every scientist, every witness in that hallway had just seen firsthand what months of official research had failed to achieve. Finally, after a long pause, Redis exhaled sharply, his expression unreadable. "Stand down," he ordered the remaining guards, his tone quieter than before. "Everyone, stand down." The tension in the hallway slowly faded as guards lowered their weapons completely, some still watching in disbelief as the hatchlings remained peacefully curled around Daniel, showing no sign of the panic that had caused such chaos only minutes earlier. Daniel looked up at Redis, unsure of what would happen next, uncertain if he had just saved the situation or made things far worse for himself. But for the first time that night, the hatchlings were calm, safe, and no longer afraid. That, to him, was worth whatever consequences came next. The days following the incident were tense throughout the facility. Reports of the breakout spread quickly among the staff, and whispers followed Daniel wherever he went. Some looked at him with suspicion, unsure why the hatchlings had responded to him so strongly. Others looked at him with quiet curiosity, wondering if he had discovered something the entire program had been missing all along. Commander Redhis called for a formal review of the incident, gathering data from Sila, security footage from the breakout, and testimony from the guards who had witnessed the standoff firsthand. He was not a man who changed his mind easily, especially not after years of following strict military protocols designed to produce obedient, controllable assets. But even he could not ignore what the evidence clearly showed. Sila used the opportunity to present her full research, the data she had been quietly gathering for weeks. She laid out clear comparisons between the hatchlings' stress levels during standard training sessions and their levels during time spent with Daniel. She showed brain scans highlighting healthy bonding patterns that had never appeared during official conditioning. She explained, patiently and clearly, that dragons raised through fear became unpredictable and difficult to control long-term, while dragons raised through trust showed far greater stability, cooperation, and resilience. The breakout wasn't a failure of security, she explained firmly, standing before Redhis and a small panel of facility officials. It was a failure of method. These hatchlings didn't run wild out of aggression. They ran because they were separated from the one source of safety they had ever known. That is not weakness, Commander. That is proof of a healthy, functioning bond, something we have failed to create through any of our official training programs. Redhis remained quiet for a long moment, staring down at the reports in front of him. He had spent years believing that strength came from discipline alone, that any form of comfort or emotional attachment would only weaken a creature meant for battle. But the evidence painted a very different picture. Finally, he spoke, his voice measured but firm. "You are proposing an entirely new training approach, one built on unqualified civilian involvement rather than structured military protocol." "I am proposing an approach that works," Sila replied evenly. "The results speak for themselves." After a long discussion, though certainly not without resistance, Redhis agreed to a trial period. Daniel would be reassigned once again, this time officially, as the primary caretaker for the hatchlings, working directly alongside Sila's research team. The enclosure would be redesigned entirely, replacing reinforced locks and cold isolation rooms with an open, comfortable space where the hatchlings could move freely, without feeling trapped or threatened. It wasn't a decision Redhis made happily. He remained skeptical, insisting on strict monitoring and regular evaluations to ensure the hatchlings still developed the discipline necessary for their eventual role. But he no longer dismissed the idea outright, and for Sila, that alone felt like a significant victory. Over the following weeks, the changes proved successful beyond what even Sila had expected. With consistent care, patience, and Daniel's steady presence, the hatchlings grew more confident, more social, and remarkably more cooperative during necessary training exercises. They responded to guidance far more willingly than before, no longer driven purely by fear of punishment, but by genuine trust in the people around them. Word of the successful shift in approach slowly spread beyond the facility, drawing quiet interest from other research stations working on similar programs. Though skepticism remained strong among many military officials, the undeniable results were difficult to ignore. As for Daniel, his life changed in ways he never expected. What started as a simple, unnoticed night shift job had turned into something far greater, though he never really thought of himself as anything special. He still mopped floors sometimes, mostly out of habit, but his true responsibility now revolved around the 4 hatchlings who had once snuck out of their enclosure just to find comfort in his presence. One quiet evening, months after the incident, Daniel sat on the floor of the newly designed enclosure, its open space filled with soft lighting and comfortable resting areas instead of cold metal walls. The 4 hatchlings, now noticeably larger and stronger than before, gathered around him just as they always had, the smallest one curling up against his side while the others settled nearby. There were no locks, no cages, no need for either. Sila watched quietly from a nearby doorway, a small smile crossing her face as she observed the peaceful scene. She had spent years studying dragons through data, reports, and controlled experiments. Yet the most important discovery of her career had come from something far simpler than any scientific method: kindness. Throughout the facility, quiet stories began to spread among the staff. Tales of the ordinary human janitor who had done what none of the military's strict programs ever could, earning the complete trust of creatures bred for war, not through strength or control, but through patience and simple, genuine care. It wasn't the kind of story anyone expected to become important. But as the hatchlings grew stronger, calmer, and more capable under this new approach, it became clear that sometimes the quietest acts of kindness carried the greatest strength of all.